Okay. Okay, so let's start. So we are doing unit 6 of MDI 001. We had looked in earlier units in terms of introduction to what is migration, what is diaspora, some of the theories of migration and diaspora. We looked at demographic movements. We looked at economic determinants. Now we have understood, and you people would have understood through various units that immigration or migration is good in the sense that migrants contribute to the host nation's economy. They contribute to the home nation by the way of remittances. We also know that migration brings in innovation, brings in new ideas to the host countries. And we've also seen that because of globalization, there is a transnational link between diaspora and the home country. And yet we see that there is a current, if you see, there's a strife in the world. In fact, very interestingly, I was just reading a news item that the new administration in the US has imposed tariffs on Mexico and Canada. The interesting part is there is a North American free trade agreement in place, which makes it clear that tariff should not be imposed. So, what is that which determines or which impedes all this? Is the politics. So let's look at this politics of migration governance. Becomes that then one can understand why what is happening is happening. As we do every time, a little tie back. Migration is a permanent or semi-permanent change. Migration is caused by various factors. I keep doing this tie back so that we revise whatever we have gone through and we are able to continue. Phenomena of international migration has been explained in an interdisciplinary perspective. Obviously, there are multiple ways to look at it. While transnationalism denotes transcending the strict distinction of national boundaries, globalization increasing integrated global order. And that is because of faster transportation, cheaper transportation, faster communication. Both processes espouse free flow of capital, ideas, people, and complement each other. Historically, people have always moved. Historically, ideas have always moved. Historically, trade has always happened. Now it is done at a much faster speed. There are a total estimation of 281 million people living in a country other than their country of birth in 2020. Population development projects the number of international migrants to be over 400 million by 2050. And we are still not accounting for what will happen out of climate change. What will climate change bring out to migration? You see the snowing on the east coast of US, Florida and New Orleans got snowed out. There is a major storm which happened in Scotland and Ireland. So climate change is happening, and there is going to be a migration because of that. We had shown this chart in terms of push and pull factors. There are economic factors, there are non-economic factors. So these are the various push and pull factors which lead to migration. Push is pushing from the home country, pull is pulling into the host country. What we did in unit 4 and 5, we looked at the fact that migration is a complex issue. Agenda for Sustainable Development recognizes for the first time the contribution of migration. And various researchers have proved that migration is good. As the migration is a dynamic phenomenon, it represents to a complex range of factors, including geopolitical situation and technological changes. Everything affects migration. Increase in global population, demand for scarce resources, aging population, the flow of migration will be constantly changing. Increasing cases of anti-migration, anti-migrant attitude across many parts of the world. We are seeing that. Very important to manage migration better for sustainable development. So And in the end, that migration governance becomes important because why? Because if people are migrating into your country or migrating out of your country, if the state is not able to determine how many people are migrating in or migrating out, how do you plan and make policy for the migration? How do you plan and make policy? For example, when the Ukraine Russian war broke out, suddenly we got to know that there are 20,000 students studying in Ukraine. Now, how do you manage? So, inevitably, information is very important, governance is very important, the politics behind migration becomes a very important thing. So, what is the objective of Unit 6? Understand what is migration governance, different instruments of migration regime, impact of politics on migration, on immigration and emigration, and challenges posed to migration governance. So, there is, and think about it. Today, when you look at the mainstream media or any media, how much are we talking about migration? So, in fact, for the first time in COVID, did suddenly everybody understood the fact that most of the major cities is comprised of migrants, because when these migrants started walking back home to their villages, did a lot of people in the cities and also in the media understand the fact that these cities are run out of migrants. Those are internal migrants. So think about the fact, in a domestic situation, it is the same country, it is the same state, it is the same set of policies, and yet it was so difficult governing these migration. When you come into an international scenario, remember there are multiple states with multiple laws, it's geopolitics, and so on and so forth. So let's look at Unit 6, Introduction. Migration emerged as one of the most critical non-traditional security challenges for nation states. There are traditional security challenges for nation states, but migration is one of the most critical non-traditional security challenge. Bearing the brunt of two world wars and a cold war, all countries should have understood the significance of peaceful cooperation. Again, we keep talking about the fact that even after the two world war, where millions of people died, and humankind understood the fact that wars was not a solution. In the 21st century, we still see multiple wars breaking out in multiple geographies. The importance of human rights over violence and the relevance of sustainable development over exploitative development. So somewhere down the line, human history continues to be circular. We keep going through the same process. We have seen mixed experiences in terms of cooperation and conflict. It's not that cooperation is not happening, it is that only conflict is happening. There are all kinds of things which are happening. Human population increases, renewed aspirations pushing people to migrate towards new places. Again, remember, we also talked about that aspiration is in terms of perception. So when a rural migrant walks into an urban center, there is a perception that he or she will have a better quality of life. So that perception makes the difference. The politics of migration governance plays a crucial role in managing the migration process, or associated with origin countries, transit countries, and destination. And also understand the fact that migration does not happen from point A to point B. Obviously, the migrant travels from A to A1 to A2 to A3 and then to B. And all these countries in between become a part. So what is politics of migration governance? That shape and regulate states' approach with regard to migration in all its form, addressing rights and responsibilities and promoting international cooperation. So what is the basic premise? The basic premise is people want better. Number one. Number two, for wanting better, people are willing to migrate to reach to that place where they are able to fulfill their desires or their aspirations. And in case impediments are brought to this migration or to this movement, people will bypass this movement. So if you look at the fact, when states increase, put up fences or bring in immigration policies against migration, what resultant is smuggling of human beings. People always, mitigate or go towards uh, better aspirations or better quality of life. And that is why it is very important to understand this, have rights and responsibilities, and promote international cooperation. So, according to IOM, migration governance may be defined as combined framework of legal norms, laws and regulations, policies and traditions, organization structures, and the relevant process. So, somebody has to talk first about migration. So, for example, India and Nepal, for example, have a visa-free movement. Now, unless you know how many people from Nepal are coming in or people from India are going to Nepal, how will you be able to allocate resources? Similarly, when we look at SAARC countries, there's Bangladesh, people are coming in, Sri Lanka, people are coming in. There is a certain ethnicity of people who are across borders. So, framework of legal norms, laws and regulations, policies and traditions, organization structures, and relevant processes. Migration government framework of IM considers to incorporate several dimensions, including policy on travel and temporary mobility, immigration, emigration, nationality, labor markets, economic and social development. So it appears to be a very simple thing that you allow people or you stop people, but there is much more to that. What happens if somebody wants to come in temporary? Does the temporary person have any right and responsibility? How does the person travel? What happens in terms of short term, medium term, or long term immigration or emigration? How are nationality issues solved? So, if a person stays in a country for, let's say, a decade, does that person automatically or through a process get nationality if the person wants to continue? What about labor markets? What about economic and social development? What about social cohesion, social services? What about health education? How are things looked at that? Politicization of migration has been increasing over the years. Now, the identity politics is a thing which is there across the world now. All nation states are experiencing some sort of identity politics. The formulation and implementation of immigration policies, border control, integration process. How is this thing moving? So, what happens if there is a climate change in the neighboring country? Have you thought about it? What happens if migrants come inside? How are you going to do it? What category are you going to put them in? Are you going to put them as a refugee status? Are you putting them as a migrant? What is the process? So unless nations start thinking and making policies or planning about this, everybody will be caught off the wrong foot. So, for example, look at this. I was picking this screenshot. Deportation is happening from the US, and a very interesting economic condition is that we have seen that the US economy. In fact, there was a news item which I showed you in the last unit. The US economy is majorly influenced by the immigrant. They not only pay taxes, they not only bring increase the GDP, but they also remit to the home state. And yet the politics of identity politics is affecting this in terms of deportations. Conceptual ideas to understand politics of migration include deeper understanding of global north and global south, representing developed and developing countries, dynamics associated migrant origin countries, transit countries, receiving countries. Once this is talked about, a very simple thing. USA has been over a period of time looking at anti-immigrant, politics. Why do people travel to US? People travel to US because a simple thing. There is US is run by the immigrant. They have a labor shortage. These immigrants come in. They do low-paying jobs. They run the economy. So, what is preventing the US from opening up, industrial units or making better quality of life in all those countries from when the migrants come in North, Central, or South America, which is also a part of the politics governance. According to Carmel Lehner, the politics of migration need to be understood through the complex interplay between institutions, political economy, post-colonialism, neocolonialism, and all those forces that develop social economy. Because inevitably, the people are moving from a place where they do not get economic or other better opportunities into places where they perceive them to be getting economic and other better life opportunities. Similarly, when India introduced Manrega, where 100 days of employment was guaranteed in the rural areas, there was a slowdown of rural to urban migration because now people could get work in the rural areas. So unless, and again, that's where you need countries need to come together to devise ways of helping each other, and seeing if migration is an issue, because there are multiple aspects to migration. One aspect, the economic aspect, we have understood that migration helps the host and the home economy, but there are other aspects of politics that we need to understand. Also influenced by structural factors including symbolic power and discursive resources, technologies of government, conduits of money and violence, as well as intersectional inequalities such as race, class, gender, age, sexuality, and disability. So, for example, there are a lot of African countries where homosexuality and other forms of what we call normal deviance is banned. Europe has a much more liberal way of life. So such people would like to travel to migrate to Europe. And that's how people always travel to where they perceive a better quality of life. So in fact, inequalities such as race, class, gender, age, sexuality, and disability also leads to migration. As international migrants, migration intersects with other transnational issues, including development, trade, security, environment change, conflict resolution, disaster risk reduction. Nearly impossible to manage it unilaterally by any state because there are multiple. See, today with globalization and this interconnectedness, any nation states which think it can solve an issue is sadly mistaken. States need to talk to each other. Nation states need to talk to each other. Geographies need to come together to solve an issue if there is an issue, if there is a perception of an issue. A multilateral approach is needed where all the countries can come together to devise a sustainable migration policy. So, if a country, as I said, if US feels that there is a major migration coming in from Central America and South America, why doesn't America sit down and talk to this? Why? Because then there are other aspects on the governance part. There is politics. One particular political party looks at migration as a big issue to get votes and so on and so forth. And this is not just a US thing; it's across the world. Migrants or refugees engage with multiple countries, including home, transit, and destination country. Essential to have some global mechanism to govern the principle. Rule-based governance to manage and resolve migration-related issues, especially, and then there needs to be some rule-based governance. It cannot be cherry picking that I will take some people and I will not take some people. when you're going to do that, unless you are a single party or a dictatorial state, in a democracy it becomes very difficult, because then people will accuse you of cherry picking. So there needs to be a rule-based governance to manage and resolve migration-related issues. Nations take care of their policies in their respective countries at domestic level, but at international level, it becomes quite a challenge to bring consensus over issues due to absence of any world government. And that is why these need to be discussed. These needs to be brought out in the public domain, talked about it, and and then resolved, because there are multiple. It's not a very simple thing to solve. Has a multi-layered and multi-level in its function. Scope and reach at national, regional, and global level make it crucial to take accounts of all relevant inputs from all the levels to make governance successful. Imperative for sovereign states to consider all relevant and now with globalization, there is a prevalence of non-state actors to formulate effective and enduring policies for common prosperous future. And these non-state actors have transnational presence. So anytime any decision is made by states, it has to take in various stakeholders. Now, the interesting part is today, the tools for doing that are easily available. For example, social media is a great place to bring in change, to have a discussion on particular topics, to get ideas from people, from state and non-state actors. So intricacies of global migration governance. Governance frameworks comprising 3 principles and 3 objectives to implement. It should be humane, it should be orderly, and it has to be well managed. Now, it can only be humane, orderly, and well managed if first there is a discussion of in terms of migration, about how many migrants are coming in, from where they're coming in, why is migration required, do we require it or not. So unless there and for example, in Europe, I think there was a research done in Sweden where the Swedish Economic Institute looked at the migration issues, because again in Swedish politics, anti-immigrant sentiment is high. They did this economic research and found out that immigration is actually good for Sweden, and if Sweden starts deporting immigrants, then that is that much how much the GDP will fall. I think it was Sweden only, and the Swedish university did this research. So it needs to be discussed. The states need to discuss. Then after that discussion, it needs to be in terms of implementation. It has to be humane, orderly, and well managed. And that well managed is only when you have when you can measure it, how many people are coming in, how many people are going out, and so on and so forth. So what are the 3 principles? Adherence to international standards and fulfillment of migrant rights. I remember in a class, a student, I was teaching human rights, and a student asked me, why should prisoners have human rights? They are criminals. Now, the point is, remember, the story is a story of human race, or the story which we tell as human beings is a story of humankind. Even if a person has committed crime or has not committed a crime but has been arrested in terms of a trial happening, that person is still a human being. A prisoner or even a criminal is still a human being, and there are some rights that person has. Similarly, a migrant might be traveling from a place to another place. He or she still has rights because he and she is a human being. Proposes to assess the status of migrants regardless of nationality as by international laws. And that is the whole process, the purpose of United Nations. The idea of United Nations and the idea of all these international organizations is that to keep repeating and keep telling everybody that after all, it's the human race that the story is all about. Migrants' right to safety, physical integrity, well-being, and dignity must be preserved. Right related to family reunification, work residency, and citizenship are also mentioned. So a state, a nation state can have a thing against migrant. They can say that migrant is not a citizen. Yet, if a migrant is there in a state, does he or she, does the state allow he or her to have some work? Because when a migrant has some work, then the migrant contributes effectively to the nation state's economy. And in case the migrant is not getting any work, then the migrant becomes a liability in that country. So all these rights need to be understood. So, for example, this picture, I picked it up from the Daily Guardian, where these migrants are chained and are being deported to Colombia. Now, the US as a country, which is a 200-year-old democracy, talks about being a world leader. This certainly picture does not denote rights of migrants. They might be illegal in the sense of the US national laws, but they are human beings and they belong to a country. Now, this picture does not come across very well in terms of the general understanding of migration or migrants. Evidence and whole of government approach to migration governance, assessment of states migration related institutional, legal and regulatory framework is proposed through analysis of transparency and coherence in migration management. So the state says that we understand that migration is going to happen, and we would want all migrants to come and register or do something so that we know and we are able to make policies. We'll take account of all ministries with responsibilities touching on the movement of people so that the broader interest of countries can be advanced. So, for example, migrants are coming in. Now, if you know how many migrants are coming in, you can prepare in terms of their healthcare, in terms of education. Are these temporary ones? Are they long term? What are they doing? That's what they are talking about, evidence and the whole of government approach to migration governance. Then they are talking about strong partnership to support migration governance. States' effort to cooperate on migration related issues with other state, non-state actors like NGOs, civil society organizations. Because if states do not create these policies, then more often than not, migration will happen through the illegal route. And in fact, then it will become a bigger challenge. So, for example, look at the fact when people from Punjab and a lot of other places were taken to the Gulf illegally through agents which were not registered with the government, inevitably it led to human trafficking. Those people got caught, and then the people had to intervene. For example, this MP from Punjab intervened to get these women back from the Gulf. So you look at the amount of effort which goes. So that is why this partnership becomes important. Then, of course, the socio-economic well-being of migrants in society. Stability, education, and employment opportunities, reducing the drivers of forced migration, including by promoting resilience, need to be desired to foster strong socio-economic outflow migration. So, for example, India and Nepal, is there a migration policy? Obviously, it's a visa-free movement. So there are people moving in, moving out. So, for example, Nepalese residents or Indian residents can open bank accounts. They can open, they can, have educational facilities, take healthcare. And such cooperations can happen, for example, in SAARC nations, for example, in North America. Various countries can have that. Effective responses to the mobility dimension of crisis, types and level of preparedness by states during environmental disasters. The nation states are still not preparing for national disasters, for environmental disasters especially. What would happen if the sea level rises and, for example, they in the models they have prepared, if the sea level rises by a few centimeters, then a large part of Bangladesh is going to be inundated. what happens to people from there? Obviously, there's going to be push regardless of nationality by providing humanitarian assistance in times of need. What is the contingency plan? What is the policy? What happens if that happens? To address the root cause of crisis, long-term approaches towards recovery, transition, and sustainable development. And the world doesn't seem to be talking enough on this. Everybody is understanding about climate change, about sea levels going up, and yet there is no, conversations, extended conversations happening on this. These are all IOM's governance frameworks, safe, orderly, and dignified pathways for migration, towards migration management, including broader control, enforcement policy, criteria for admission, resilience, preparedness, human trafficking, smuggling of migrants, and integration of returning citizens. So, in fact, the states need to be understood. So, for example, the US is talking about deporting. They were talking about 18,000 Indians to be deported back. For example, those 20,000 students which came back from Ukraine after the war, what is the process of integration of these returning students or the integration of these returning citizens? Which states are they from? What will happen in terms of reintegration? To implement this policy, Migration and Border Agency would work with national and international justice and security agency, collect, analyze, use information to address migration relations. Is this information being collected? What is the kind of information which is coming out? Where is it being collected? How is it being processed? How is it being shared with various agencies? So these are all a part of the governance framework. So there is a migration governance index by IOM. IOM is International Organization of Migration. You can, open another tab in your mobile or your laptop. Go on to IOM site. You will see multiple tabs. You can bookmark that page. While I'm talking, you can open that IOM site. IOM keeps talking about all these things in terms of migration. Describe 5 important policy domains to define a well-managed migration policy. See, again, when we look at various countries, obviously countries like India and China will have major issues because of the population and the diversity. So, in fact, the smaller countries can do a better job because of their smallness. For example, European countries can do a better job because they are smaller countries. The population is much more manageable. Their diversity is not as huge as India. So, institutional capacity includes a framework, strategy, legal framework, transparency and coherence, data gathering, and information ability. And in fact, we during the American elections, we saw that a lot of times American politicians also were throwing numbers without, any coherence in terms of how many actual immigrants are there and how many of them are illegal. So institutional capacity is one. Migrants' rights, access to basic social services, social security, family rights, right to work, long-term residency, and part to citizenship. Now, that is why it is said that non-traditional security challenges, for example, nations are today scared that these migrations might be here to disrupt the security of a nation state. Now, one way is to have some sort of a governance in terms of who these migrants are, where they are coming, what are they coming for, or the second is, the political approach of saying they are a security hazard, and yet we know the fact that if a migrant is getting a better opportunity, he or she will migrate through legal or illegal channels. So it is always better to go through a legal one because that way you can measure and manage. So is there a family right? Is there a right to work? Then safe and orderly migration, border controls and enforcement, admission and eligibility criteria, reintegration policies, measure to combat human trafficking and smuggling. Because if you are not doing safe and orderly migration, it will lead to human trafficking and smuggling. Because as I said, people will move if they have to move. So if a person is feeling prosecuted at a particular country and there is an opportunity in another country, that person will take whatever it takes to migrate. That's why IOM is talking about safe and orderly migration. It's talking about labor migration management. So, skills and qualification recognition, student migration regulation, bilateral labor agreements, migrant remittances. So, again, hypothetically, or it might be already done, if Colombian migrants are, coming into America for doing, labor related job, there could be an agreement whereby US could say that we need so many migrants and this is the legal route that you can come. This is the amount of time you can stay and do work and then go back. There could be, this policy. I am not sure whether there is a policy or not. And that is one of the reasons why there is work and the migration happens. Regional and international cooperation and other partnership, signature and ratification of international conventions, regional cooperations, bilateral agreements, global. Essentially, IOM is saying the fact that migration is a done deal. It's going to happen because it's been happening historically. And nation states need to understand that this will happen, whatever they do. So it will be better if you are preparing for it and managing it with bilateral or multilateral cooperations. In the absence of these cooperations, inevitably migration will happen and you will not be able to manage it. Can simply be defined as a national, regional, or international effort to codify and manage migration. You can manage anything, one which you can measure. If you can't measure, you can never manage. That's the basic thumb rule of management. If you can't measure, you can't manage. So then there is politics which comes in, which talks about, or there is an institutional apathy. Okay, it's not such an important subject that we should, spend time, money, and energy or talking space on it. So let's look at some instruments of migration regime. There is a 1951 Refugee Convention. Important legal documents governing laws relating to refugees in most part of the world, multilateral treaty ratified by 145 states. People living outside their home country who are unable or unwilling to return home because of well-founded fear of persecution are defined as refugees. 145 states have ratified it, and yet we see there is a refugee crisis which happens. So 1951 Refugee Convention prescribed the definition of a refugee's right of displaced and legal obligation of states to protect them. Some of the principles of crucial importance in this 51 Refugee Convention are non-discrimination, non-penalization, and non-refoulement. Should not be forcibly returned or expelled against their will to territories where they have a threat to their life and freedom. So, for example, in a lot of cases, what now this deportation which will happen from the US will contravene the policy of non-refoulement, because a lot of these guys might have escaped because of persecution back home. We know Colombia has a major drug-related crime. South America, there are a lot of places where there are drug-related crime. People might have escaped because of that, and so on and so forth. So this is the 1951 Refugee Convention. Then there is a ILO Migration for Employment Convention 49, which has been revised, enforced in 52. See, these legal instruments or these international instruments are like the pole star for states, nation states, in terms of guiding them in terms of migration or migrants. the nation states again ratify it and choose to ignore. But that is how it in a sound world order, states, especially democracies, are supposed to look at them as pole stars. Need to provide information relating to national policy on immigration, and information conditions of work and livelihood of migrants to ILO whenever requested. So ILO is the nodal organization for labor, because inevitably, if a migration happens, people need work. Then ILO Convention concerning migration in abusive condition, promotion of equality of opportunities, and treatment of migrant workers. There's a convention for that also, enforced in 78. Each member for which the convention is enforced undertakes to respect the human rights of all migrant workers. So even if a person is an illegal migrant in terms of a national law, that person has some rights. Authors of manpower trafficking can be prosecuted, whatever the country from which they exercise their activities. So it also says that if there is a human trafficking, the person who does, or the organization who does trafficking, can be persecuted. Then there is an international convention on the protection of the rights of all migrant workers and members of their families. Vulnerability of migrant workers, their families, because of their absence from their state of origin to the presence of state of employment. Monitored by Office of High Commission for Human Rights, came into force in 2003. No major migrant receiving state in Europe or North America has ratified the convention, which is where then the politics of the North versus South comes in. There is this geopolitics of we are developed, we have the right, and we can do anything. So this particular regime, 1990 convention, has not been ratified. Then there is, of course, the instruments of migrant regime, the Palermo Protocol. This is for human trafficking, protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. So you will read a lot about Palermo Protocol in MDI 009 and MDI 0010, 010, 009 and 010, which is primarily on trafficking and various aspects of trafficking and legal aspects. A common international definition of trafficking in person has to be incorporated in it. So that's the Palermo Protocol. You'll hear this term very often. Intends to highlight the problems associated with trafficking in person, which often leads to inhuman, degrading, and dangerous exploitation of traffic. So inevitably, if the legal route gets blocked, or the legal route is not simple to undertake, people will use the illegal route in terms of smuggling. But there is always a possibility that there will be these set of people who would want to exploit some set of vulnerable people and traffic them into migration. They traffic them. Migration is trafficking them from one country to another country to push them into hard labor and so on and so forth. Palermo Protocols applies to prevention, investigation, and prosecution of traffic offenses, as well as protection of traffic persons. Then there is Protocol against smuggling of migrants by land, sea, and air 2000. Prevent and combat smuggling of migrants by land, sea. Again, as I said, if the legal route is difficult, if there are multiple ways to stop migration from happen, people will migrate by the route of smuggling. Cooperation among states, parties ensuring the protection of the rights of smuggled migrants, cooperation, exchange of information, appropriate measures like socio-economic at national, regional, and international level. So, these are, again, all these international instruments are like guiding stars for nation states. Nation states, once they ratify, they are bound to follow this. However, we have seen states choose to ignore instruments of migration regime guiding principles on internal displacement. So there is a guiding principle on internal displacement also, on IDP or internal displaced people, applicable in different phases of displacement, providing protection against arbitrary displacement, access to protection and assistance, guarantees during return or alternative settlement and reintegration. We have seen during COVID how the migrants were left to fend for themselves. The internally displaced migrants were left to fend for themselves. Those pictures which came out for the first time, people realized the fact that all urban centers are run by migrants. Concerning authority, intergovernment and non-government organizations raising the consciousness on internal migration, enable preventive steps to manage the challenge of internal migration, recognize the problems of. So every migration has issues, whether it's internal and international. International has much bigger issues with respect to different laws by different nation states. Internal has different issues, and it affects millions of people. Attempted to provide protection and assistance to IDPs and devise an institutional arrangement to help poor, dispossessed, and vulnerable people. We've seen in the recent conflict in Gaza how millions were displaced, and what was the state. So, in spite of all the international instruments, countries chose not to follow that, and we saw the pictures which were coming out. So if you look at institutions, these were the instruments. If you look at institutions, United Nations High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR, 50 with its established 1950 headquarters in Geneva, guided by United Nations General Assembly and Economic and Social Council, responsible for upholding the 51 Convention on Refugees. Gathers relevant data relating to asylum seekers, refugees, returnees, stateless persons, internal dispersals to formulate policies. So this is the institution which is the prime institution which is looking at refugees, assess government and other organizations dealing with human trafficking and overcoming migration and management challenges. Takes into account mixed migration. Now you can also open another Google page and search for what is mixed migration. Because again, think of it. Till now, a migrant was categorized as there were only two categories in terms of movement of people: a migrant or a refugee. But now they have brought in a new term which is called mixed migration. Mixed migration could be many more categories. So a person may not be persecuted, but feels persecuted and is moving. So that person will not get a refugee status in the true sense of the word, but it's like it could be a homosexual in a particular country. So he is not a refugee in a sense, but he feels persecuted and moves. So that this person now comes under mixed migration, and inevitably this expands the word or the term of migration to include multiple categories, and then helps nations prepare for that. So you can open a Google page and look at what is mixed migration to understand. So this term is now mixed migration, which encompasses not only a migrant and a refugee, but many other categories. Complex nature hence demands due research and effort. So UNHCR. Then there is United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Coordinates humanitarian partners at countries, regional or global levels, accountable humanitarian actions to provide necessary assistance and protection. So that's another institution. instruments of the migration in sustainable development agenda. So sustainable development now is looking at migration, adopted 17 sustainable development goals to reduce inequality within and among countries, assist to facilitate order, safe, regular, and responsible migration and mobility. So, United Nations and also larger international organizations are now understanding that migration is a thing which will happen. Whether we choose to look at it or not look at it, it will happen. Whether the nation states are prepared or not prepared, it is going to happen. And that is why they have incorporated this in sustainable development agenda. Then there are some regional instruments. So, for example, African Union Convention for Protection and Assistance of Eternal Displaced People. Africa is a huge continent, and multiple countries. People are moving across Africa. In fact, tomorrow when we do in MDI 003 about West and North Africa, we'll see how movement happens within the African states. A lot of migration happens within African states, which is known as the Kampala Convention of Regional Mechanism to address the issues of internal displacement among African countries. So, impact of politics on immigration and emigration. Politics becomes a bulwark about how nations deal with immigration and emigration, about migration. No specific global law favors the global north so that they can exercise their own discretion to do cherry picking while accepting and denying entry to migrants to suit their own convenience and requirements. So that is generally the feeling that the global north cherry picks in terms of migrants is a matter of debate worldwide as it touches not only politics but economics, demographic, national security, culture, language, and religion. So one of the factors which is driving the US politics is that these migrants who are coming into the US drive down wages. And when they drive down wages, remember the basic American is not highly educated. The number of college degrees in America is much lower. And in fact, today, the major amount of Silicon Valley workforce comes from India and China and other migrants. So these migrants come and drive down the wages because they are willing to work at lower wages, resulting in the American youth not getting their proper wage, which is driving the politics, which is one of the factors driving the politics. ILO clearly said that each member for which convention is enforced under it, as far as national law and regulation permit, takes all steps against misleading prominent relating to immigrant. So ILO says that, and it is the rule. However, if you see the politics is different because politics becomes a very important tool in a nation state, which drives a lot of things. Despite the availability of some international laws, almost all immigrant workers face the same set of issues like relegation to low-paid job, low-status job, denial of labor right, political disenfranchisement, state repression, racism, bigotry, and nativism. In fact, during COVID, it was also shown in the Western nations how most of the regular working jobs which required people to come out was done by the immigrants. The citizens, locked themselves inside. It was the immigrants who did the cleaning and the various jobs which required to be done for a city to be working. So the politics of immigration and emigration, states' control over immigrant labor, denial of civil, political, and other citizenship right to immigrant workers, not to prevent but to control the transnational movement of labor and to lock that labor into a situation of permanent insecurity and vulnerability. See, again, we also need to understand there is this larger capitalism in picture. Capitalism is only about profits. Profit means driving down labor cost. The global working class thus becomes divided between citizens and immigrant labor. The creation of these distinct categories replaces earlier direct colonial and racial caste controls over labor worldwide. So, in one another way, we need to understand that once we look at history, we'll understand why what is happening today is happening. It's not to prevent, but to control. And nation states, the capitalist, thing, the way colonization might have gone, but in the neo-colonial world, this is how control is done. And then there is this perceived erosion of national sovereignty, between national sovereignty and international cooperation, which is applicable to migration policy. So, if you also understand the fact that globally all these things are happening together, you cannot say one over another. There is a complex negotiation which happens. A lot of people get confused and saying, why this and why not this? We need to understand that's how things happen. It's like, look at yourself. If you look at yourself, there's a complex negotiation happening between work life, home life, between investment, between entertainment. There is a complex negotiation. And in that negotiation, something comes about. Now, you are just an individual. You look at the family you are staying in. There is a complex negotiation which happens. There is some politics which happens in the family. Now, look at the fact it's a nation, huge number of people, diverse people jostling for power. Then you look at the world, there are multiple nations jostling for power. So obviously, it's a complex negotiation. Negative public perception of migration. And that is also what the media creates. Media will keep bringing out this, this migrant was caught in some, attack or in some theft. And, it almost is that all migrants are painted with the same brush. I was looking at some video which was coming out where they caught some Indian migrants on the Mexico border. So you are, painting every migrant with that brush. In most cases, public considers immigration as a grave threat due to perception created by the media and politicians with vested interest. The identity politics produce anti-immigrant feeling among the familiar people, leading to violence. And it's not just internationally, nationally, if you see, you will always come across politicians who will create this particular perception that this particular immigrant is, taking up your jobs, is taking up your resources. That's how it works, the negative perception. And then, of course, the lack of international cooperation, own set of challenges. Difference also arise over real or perceived threat to overall security of the country, wage differential due to immigration, allocation of social services to the citizens of the country. So there is this perception of fear. It could be real or it could be perceived. Quite challenging to bring consensus among all countries over global migration policy, which needs to cover all issues concerning migration. Then, lastly, there is an institutional apathy. Strong institutions available at global level. Few institutions are solely focusing on the aspect relating to migration and its impact. So, do we have a Ministry of Migration or do we have a Ministry of Immigrants and Emigrants? We do not. Many states are not considering migration as a priority area under their respective policies. So unless you you are devoting talking points, you're devoting thought, you're devoting research, you're finding numbers, then it becomes more of a political rhetoric. There's an institutional apathy. So let's sum up. As a human population increases, so it's a renewed aspirations pushing people to migrate towards new places for one or the other reasons. Politics of migration governance plays a crucial role managing and migration process with origin countries, transit countries, destination countries. Several dimensions including policy on travel, temporary mobility, immigration, emigration, labor markets, economic, social development, industry. And if you look at it, each of these, if you in any nation states are separate ministries. And unless there is a coordination between these ministries, you can never come out with a policy, because inevitably then there is those cracks. Challenges to migration governance includes perceived erosion of sovereignty, public perception, negative public perception, lack of international cooperation, and institutional apathy. The institutions do not feel this is a complex or an important enough issue which merit attention. There are some references: role of trans-regionalism, the migration governance framework, definition and migration. So even if you do a Google search, and now there is a new AI on the blog, DeepSeek. DeepSeek gives you a very interesting. I've started using DeepSeek. If you ask for references, it will give you references. Always cross-check. Remember, in an AI model, it's based on a data. If the data is erroneous, you'll get erroneous results. Whenever using ChatGPT or any AI model, please cross-check, cross-verify references. Okay, I have reached to the end. If there is any question, let me switch on my video. Hi, guys. Any question? Sanjeev, any question?
Sir, I have a question out of syllabus actually. Syllabus in the sense today's class.
Please.
Like, for example, one person moving from one place to another place for a temporary period. What it is called as? Is it called as a temporary internal migration, or will it be considered as a circular migration?
See, Sanjeev, any movement is migration. Migration is what? Moving from one place to another.
Yes.
So so even if you are going for a travel, you are migrating for a short period.
Yes, sir.
So
yes, sir.
Unless it's on a day or two, then you are traveling and coming back.
Yes, sir.
That will come under mobility. But anytime you are moving, it is and moving from one place to another place, it is migration. Mobility. When the birds come in the winter from the north to the south, it is called migration.
Migration. Yes.
They go back in the summers.
Yes.
So any movement is migration.
Sir, for example, even it is for a temporary period. I mean,
correct. See, again, look at the fact that the way people do. When people are wanting to do better, let's say I do not have an economic opportunity where I stay, and sir, I find there is an economic opportunity at point B, then I would like to go there. I might think I'm going there for a month, but there is always a possibility that once I go there for a month, I like it and I want to stay.
Yes.
Temporary also is that a company sends its employees for a 6-month assignment.
Yes.
But you are migrating from a particular culture and a particular place to another culture and another place. It's a migration. It's a new setup.
Sir.
Unless you're just taking a car and coming back, then you are traveling.
Yes.
So you see.
So, sir, for example, let's take the example of Kumbh Mela congregation. For a person who is visiting for a darshan or something like that, it can be called as mobility.
Correct.
Whereas if a sage or this Swami, any Swami, from moving from one place to another place, staying for a month or something like that, it's called migration.
Correct. It will be migration. Huh? He's migrating from a particular setup into another setup.
Sir.
Why don't you open another tab and write migration, define migration? What does it say? See, what does it say?
Sir, I'll use my mobile.
You're using your mobile for this?
Yeah.
Can Anshik?
No. Yeah, anybody can, sir. Meanwhile, I will try in my mobile, actually, Google. I'll Google it.
Vinod, just take another tab and find out the definition of migration.
So,
Yes, Anshika?
migration is the movement of people or animals from one place to another. It can be internal, meaning people move within a country, or international, meaning people move across the borders.
Sanjeev? Sanjeev, did you get that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
So, if I am visiting and coming back in terms of travel, any period of time which is not immediate, I go there and come back immediately. Migration is the movement of people or animals from one place to another. It can be so any movement is migration.
Sir.
Okay.
Sir.
Any other question?
So,
Yes, Anshika.
So Donald Trump, what he did in America these days, and he also give a certain deadline in second week of February. If the couples got their children before that time,
Correct.
they will get the citizenship, and if they didn't born, they will not get the citizenship of America. And many couples ran for the C-section as well.
Correct.
So what made Donald Trump do this, and why
this-
he's targeting to the children's and all?
See, again, Anshika, we need to understand, as I was talking about politics of migration governance, remember at the end of the day, there is politics. So, there are all these engines which are running together. There is economics, there is security, there is this, that, and the other, and there is an underlying politics to it. Now, Trump, the president of America, and the Republican Party ran their whole campaign against immigrant because that is the way they got votes from the normal white Americans. Now, that is the ironical factor because Trump himself is an immigrant, and so are most. Correct. Problem. What typically happens, we know this when you go into identity politics. Uh, a common person cannot understand between illegal and legal. A common person understands migrant. So when the Indian politics or the Indian politicians talks about a Bangladeshi migrant, there are a lot of Bangladeshis who might have come here legally for work or whatever. Now, so inevitably, the common people, and then what typically happens is in the media, the way media stereotypes work, there is an anti immigrant sentiment which gets developed. Little realizing the fact that it has many more consequences than just a basic political rhetoric. And nobody in, let's say, President Trump or the Republican Party defined as to how many illegal immigrants are there. And if US, being a superpower with all its economic and technological prowess, is not able to measure how many illegal immigrants are there, then what hope is there for India? US is a much smaller country in terms of population. It has got much more technology, surveillance mechanism. They still cannot give a number. So then, what typically happens when this comes out in the media and the way media handles it, it becomes, it has various other forms. And you will see how the racial attacks against Indians, for example, is growing because Indians are also immigrants out there. Indians might be third generation immigrants, they might be natural citizens of America, but then it will be a racial thing where people will say, oh, you are not white, you are an immigrant, you are an illegal immigrant, get out. So there are consequences to it. That's why, all these migration governance talks about respect, talks about, unnecessarily propaganda at the end of the day, because economics is driven out of migrants, na? Anshika?
Yes, sir. But the children, which they have gave a certain time period, like second week of February.
So see,
If they
sorry, bolo.
Sir, you get my question.
I got your question. See, again, so the politics is now driving a nation and its policies. And inevitably, we also need to understand that, when you start doing this, then people will start finding ways and means of circumventing this. See, if your policy and your laws are not just humane and orderly, people will find their way about. We have to understand about people. People will always find out a way to circumvent if your policy is not just humane and orderly. Look at the fact that 13 years Syria was in a civil war. People were living there. People found a way to exist. Look at Gaza. 1 year it was bombed. People found a way to live and come back. People will always listen. It's been 1 lakh years of human beings on this planet, modern human beings on the planet. We always find out a way. That's what human beings are all about. There is a resilience. So it is always good that if you are able to do an orderly, manageable policy, in the absence of which people will find their ways. Hanchika?
Yes, sir. They will find out a way.
They will find a way. Any other question? Yeah, Vinod. Vinod, do you want to ask something? Vinod is okay. Internal. Vinod has given a illegal migration. Okay. No, I can't hear you, Vinod. I can't. I saw you unmute yourself, and that was it. My question is, yeah, I can see your chat. Carry on. Just a minute. Vinod is asking a question. Vinod, one thing we need to understand, for example, Kerala has Norca, okay? See, one of the things when you're talking about states, you're talking about the Indian states. Now, the fact is, Kerala was one of the first states where there was a large scale migration in Gulf or to the Gulf. Kerala has been always in the forefront in terms of making policies. Look at the socio-economic parameters of Kerala. Look at the health status. In fact, when you look at the socio-economic parameters in Kerala, they are some of the best and compares with the world standards. So Kerala has always been ahead. Now again, we have a problem in terms of taking out best policies from each other, from every other state, and compiling them and using it. There is this competition, political competition between parties and states of not wanting to take best practices. So now other states, for example, Telangana is looking at, diaspora engagement. Punjab is doing a lot of diaspora engagement. However, it is a complex issue, and the complex issue needs to be thought out and articulated in form of politics. See, today politics is being driven by diasporas, and yet the Indian states are not being able to come out with policies because it's still not. Listen, there are so many areas which the states are working on. Migration and diaspora is now understood as an important area, so possibly they are possibly coming out. Kerala has always been a forefront in terms of all these things. Vinod? And that's where it's very important for the diasporas to also push state governments into formulating policies, not just for diasporas, but for short term, medium term, and states need to understand. Today, states need to also understand that what happens if there is a climate change crisis in one state, which pushes people into another state. Look at a simple example of, the Kumbh, where there was a stampede, they were not able to manage, and which led to multiple people losing their lives. You need to plan for this. You need to understand how many people, and then inevitably sometimes the political rhetoric gets the better of the institution. There is an institutional lethargy. Vinod? See, again, diaspora or immigrants are looked at a negative connotation because there is this, politics and the political narrative in the media. Because inevitably, see, it's something like this. You keep ascribing names to a set of people, inevitably, the media picks it up and then brings it out as a stereotype. And then because of today, the world is not the same as it was earlier. Today it is a much more connected globalization. Because of globalization, connected, and everything affects everything else. America is the most ironical example because Americans are nothing but immigrants. And yet, look at the fact that American politicians are riding the anti immigrant bandwagon. But that's the irony of it. India has always been Vasudev Kutumbakam. All society, all communities which were persecuted anywhere in the world used to come to India. India is talking about an anti-immigrant politics. So, this is also a phase of the world where, nations do this. Possibly better sense will prevail, or there will be some other bigger aspect which will happen, which will get world to collaborate. So, this is a part of the negotiation. Any other question? Okay. So, if there's no other question, we'll call it a day. And we'll meet each other tomorrow at 5 o'clock with MDI 003. I am going to be doing unit 26 and 28, which is the North African and the West African diaspora. And we'll see each other tomorrow evening. Bye bye then.